Hello everybody, I'm Sam and you are listening to Chilliteracy, where I've just confused myself because I just like I have stuff that I was planning to read tonight, and today even it's the afternoon. Hi, hello, it's 5 p.m. Do you know where your kids are? And I had the fan on because it is warm today, and I cannot have the fan on while streaming because this is effectively an audio only stream, and even if you say it's fine, but when I'm talking, which is what I'm going to be doing for the next 2 hours, all you hear is ooh in the background. It's going to get annoying to me, if nothing else, when I check the VOD afterwards. Your kids are nowhere to be found. Should you be worried? That's probably fine. Ray Trace, yours are at circus camp. Hell yeah, okay. Nice. You don't actually need to tell me where your kids are. It's okay. Do not dox your kids. Yeah. But then, in the process of the countdown, I picked up my copy of it's a Philip K. Dick collection I read from the other day. We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, and there's a quote. There's two things. Firstly, there's a quote from him at the start that I was like, oh, this would be really good for a cold open. We biffed that. I'll read that in a second, but didn't get to cold open with it. And then secondly, the introduction to it about him and his work I saw was written by Thomas M. Dish, who wrote Descending, that I read the other day. I was like, oh, neat. I completely had missed who wrote the introduction for this book, but it turns out someone else who wrote one of my favourite short stories about depression. So it's one of your favourite collections. Oh hell yeah, Ray Tracer, you have it too? Nice. I am sure that I will have read all of these, but I don't actually remember doing that or when I did, which has kind of been a little bit of a side effect of doing some reading for these streams, of making me go, you know what? I need to brush up on this again. These are some very good stories with some very neat ideas, and I could do a lot worse than remind myself of their content. But now, frankly, that I think in this weather it's impossible to do a cold open, but let's have a lukewarm open anyway with this. How does one fashion a book of resistance, a book of truth in an empire of falsehood, or a book of rectitude in an empire of vicious lies? How does one do this right in front of the enemy? Not through the old-fashioned ways of writing while you're in the bathroom, but how does one do that in a truly future technological state? Is it possible for freedom and independence to arise in new ways under new conditions? That is, will new tyrannies abolish these protests? Or will there be new responses by the spirit that we can't anticipate? Philip K. Dick in an interview 1974, from Only Apparently Real. And I read that and thought, damn, you wrote that in 1974? I guess these things just never go out of fashion. Because, yeah, hands up if that still rings with some kind of relevance today. But yeah, there you go. There's your lukewarm open. I forgot to listen to today's Dracula, but it's a short one. You can do that in the break. Nice. All right. You really need to go to bed early. I need to remember what sleep at a reasonable time is, but that's been difficult for a while now. Relatable. Oof. Yep. Yeah. Right. And say there's another one. A story that I started to read myself just because it's got an incredible title. That is The Day Mr. Computer Fell Out of Its Tree. And yeah, I started to read that one thinking, oh, maybe on stream, but I don't think on stream. But yeah, that sort of felt, kind of, if you happen to go look that up, I'll give you the title again. The Day Mr. Computer Fell Out of Its Tree. It feels oddly prescient of today's ChatGPT infused just malarkey. Let's go with that. So, yeah, I, rest in peace, Big Phil. You would have hated modern society. You would have hated the world that we built. So, I'm glad in some ways that you got out before this hit, because I don't think you'd have enjoyed it. But, that's what sci-fi is to me. It's a way to it's a way to extrapolate and look at the problems of today and go, yeah, but what if we built a torment nexus? And unfortunately, some people want torment nexuses. Sick. I want funding for that. So, no, Andy Pants, you're fine. You missed the lukewarm open, where I read a quote, which I can drop at the end. We building torment nexi today? We might do. Yeah. What I've got planned for today is, I'll get onto it because again there's a lot, but it shouldn't be 3+ hours. Is the first chapter of Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. Possibly the first 1 or 2 chapters from Ubik by Philip K. Dick, which sadly it doesn't really get into the story. That bit, it sort of sets it up, but it doesn't really get into like the real meat of the story for that. But again, it is not a work that is in the public domain. It is not a work we have like sought permission to read, so I wouldn't want to read the whole thing on here. And it is still for me the complete story. One of those ones that I read and just went, oh, I really enjoyed this. This is a lot of fun. Great. Okay, so it's a story that has meant a lot to me over the years. Which is why I'm reading it here. And then I thought we'd finish on The 9 Billion Names of God by Arthur C. Clarke, because, it's... Again, for me, it's a complex and interesting one, because it deals with... It's a very quick, it's not particularly, like, deep or insightful story. It's very much the like, what a twist kind of thing. But I don't know, I enjoy it a lot, and I think it's an interesting one, and I like it. So I'm going to read it because I found a copy of it available online. It's short, but yeah. So fewer torment nexi today. Fewer depression allegories. Or yeah, no, like nothing in the realm of like Electric Ant. On the phone you can actually hear the background rain. Hey, nice. Okay, cool. It would be nice if there was apparently a bit of a storm last night. There was some rain that I missed, and then I saw lightning and heard no thunder. Which, let me tell you, at like so about 12, between 12:30 and 1 in the morning. To go and just like glance out your bathroom window and see the completely dark skyline light up in a bright flash and no sound to follow it is a little bit unsettling. Just, yeah, I'm used to some secondary symptom to go with that. So just, oh, that was, do we not have that? No, not really. You thought you saw lightning without rain or thunder last night? Yeah, like that seems to be, like, I am not used to that. I am pretty much just used to, if there is lightning, you get a roll of thunder at some point a few seconds afterwards. Gonna be storms tomorrow, but no drop in temperatures, what you think is cheating. You wish to, I just want, if you go and like turn the hose on and soak yourself, it's not as satisfying. It needs to be like state sanctioned, like we need someone to turn on the weather, and that's okay to get soaked through. But if I just go and like hose myself down, that it doesn't feel as good. Call it heat lightning. You don't think it's anything actually to do with the heat, it just happens a lot in the summer. Oh yeah, no, like what we tend to get is you just get like days and days of a big humidity build up. It just gets like warmer and closer, and the air just gets like thicker, And people start saying, oh, feels like a storm's coming in. And then the sky turns purple and everything just kicks off. And yeah, big in the summer in particular, it's like really when this happens. And that's where you get like just methylated spirit purple skies and huge fat drops of rain just slamming into the ground and exploding, and big forks of lightning just ripping through the sky. And that's when you run outside like, yeah, it's raining, let's go. And it's super cool. Summer thunderstorms are the best. Yes, I agree. Fine until the sky turns green. That's Stardew. Never seen purple skies? Oh, you're missing out. They're the best. But speaking, I guess, of weird natural phenomena, should we start with our first story, which, as I say, I do not have a text that I can link, but actually I think chapter 1 of Annihilation, which is what I'm about to read, is available as like a free sample on the Kindle store, because that's how I started reading this on my phone on the Kindle app, and went, oh, this is really good. I should get the rest of this. I tore through this. Green or yellow is tornado skies. Interesting. No, we don't. We don't have those yet. So I hope I never get to see that. That's spooky. Okay. I'm varnish on a plywood desk counts as wood. I'm knocking. Okay. Shall we begin? Because there's no text I can link, but you can, I believe, access this through like a free sample on the Kindle store if you wanted to go do that to read along. Probably some other places. I imagine like the first chapter would have been uploaded elsewhere. But if we're ready, I'm going to start reading Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. Chapter 1. Initiation. With additional background noise and motorbikes and traffic. The tower, which was not supposed to be there, plunges into the earth in a place just before the black pine forest begins to give way to swamp, and then the reeds and wind-gnarled trees of the marsh flats. Beyond the marsh flats and the natural canals lies the ocean, and a little farther down the coast, a derelict lighthouse. All of this part of the country had been abandoned for decades, for reasons that are not easy to relate. Our expedition was the first to enter Area X for more than 2 years, and much of our predecessors' equipment had rusted, their tents and sheds little more than husks. Looking out over that untroubled landscape, I do not believe any of us could yet see the threat. There were 4 of us, a biologist, an anthropologist, a surveyor, and a psychologist. I was the biologist. All of us were women this time, chosen as part of the complex set of variables that governed sending the expeditions. The psychologist, who was older than the rest of us, served as the expedition's leader. She had put us all under hypnosis to cross the border to make sure we remained calm. It took 4 days of hard hiking after crossing the border to reach the coast. Our mission was simple: to continue the government's investigation into the mysteries of Area X, slowly working our way out from base camp. The expedition could last days, months, or even years depending on various stimuli and conditions. We had supplies with us for 6 months, and another 2 years' worth of supplies had already been stored at the base camp. We had also been assured that it was safe to live off the land if necessary. All of our foodstuffs were smoked or canned or in packets. Our most outlandish equipment consisted of a measuring device that had been issued to each of us, which hung from a strap on our belts, a small rectangle of black metal with a glass-covered hole in the middle. If the hole glowed red, we had 30 minutes to remove ourselves to a safe place. We were not told what the device measured or why we should be afraid should it glow red. After the first few hours, I had grown so used to it that I hadn't looked at it again. We had been forbidden watches and compasses. When we reached the camp, we set about replacing obsolete or damaged equipment with what we had brought and putting up our own tents. We would rebuild the sheds later, once we were sure that Area X had not affected us. The members of the last expedition had eventually drifted off one by one. Over time, they had returned to their families, so strictly speaking they did not vanish. They simply disappeared from Area X and, by unknown means, reappeared back in the world beyond the border. They could not relate the specifics of that journey. This transference had taken place across a period of 18 months, and it was not something that had been experienced by prior expeditions. But other phenomena could also result in premature dissolution of expeditions, as our superiors put it, so we needed to test our stamina for that place. We also needed to acclimate ourselves to the environment. In the forest near base camp, one might encounter black bears or coyotes. You might hear a sudden croak, and watch a night heron startle from a tree branch and, distracted, step on a poisonous snake, of which there were at least 6 varieties. Bogs and streams hid huge aquatic reptiles, and so we were careful not to wade too deep to collect our water samples. Still, these aspects of the ecosystem did not really concern any of us. Other elements had the ability to unsettle, however. Long ago, towns had existed here, and we encountered eerie signs of human habitation. Rotting cabins with sunken, red-tinged roofs, rusted wagon wheel spokes half buried in the dirt, and the barely seen outlines of what used to be enclosures for livestock, now mere ornament for layers of pine needle loam. Far worse, though, was a low, powerful moaning at dusk. The wind off the sea and the odd interior stillness dulled our ability to gauge direction, so that the sound seemed to infiltrate the black water that soaked the cypress trees. This water was so dark we could see our faces in it, and it never stirred, set like glass, reflecting the beards of grey moss that smothered the cypress trees. If you looked out through these areas, towards the ocean, all you saw was the black water, the grey of the cypress trunks, and the constant, motionless rain of moss flowing down. All you heard was the low moaning. The effect of this cannot be understood without being there. The beauty of it cannot be understood either, and when you see beauty in desolation, it changes something inside you. Desolation tries to colonize you. As noted, we found the tower in a place just before the forest became waterlogged and then turned to salt marsh. This occurred on our 4th day after reaching base camp, by which time we had almost gotten our bearings. We did not expect to find anything there, based on both the maps that we brought with us and the water-stained, pine-dust-smeared documents our predecessors had left behind. But there it was, surrounded by a fringe of scrub grass, half hidden by fallen moss off to the left of the trail, a circular block of some greyish stone seeming to mix cement and ground-up seashells. It measured roughly 60 feet in diameter, this circular block, and was raised from ground level by about 8 inches. Nothing had been etched into or written on its surface that could in any way reveal its purpose or the identity of its makers. Starting at due north, a rectangular opening set into the surface of the block, revealing stairs spiraling down into darkness. The entrance was obscured by the webs of banana spiders and debris from storms, but a cool draft came from below. At first, only I saw it as a tower. I don't know why the word tower came to me, given that it tunneled into the ground. I could as easily have considered it a bunker or a submerged building, yet as soon as I saw the staircase I remembered the lighthouse on the coast, and had a sudden vision of the last expedition drifting off, one by one, and sometime thereafter the ground shifting in a uniform and pre-planned way to leave the lighthouse standing where it had always been, but depositing this underground part of it inland. I saw this in vast and intricate detail as we stood there, and, looking back, I mark it as the first irrational thought I had once we had reached our destination. "This is impossible," said the surveyor, staring at her maps. The solid shade of late afternoon cast her in cool darkness and lent the words more urgency than they would have had otherwise. The sun was telling us that soon we'd have to use our flashlights to interrogate the impossible, although I'd have been perfectly happy doing it in the dark. "And yet there it is," I said, "unless we are having a mass hallucination." "The architectural model is hard to identify," the anthropologist said. "The materials are ambiguous, indicating local origin but not necessarily local construction. Without going inside, we will not know if it is primitive or modern, or something in between. I'm not sure I would want to guess at how old it is either." We had no way to inform our superiors about this discovery. One rule for an expedition into Area X was that we were to attempt no outside contact, for fear of some irrevocable contamination. We also took little with us that matched our current level of technology. We had no cell or satellite phones, no computers, no camcorders, no complex measuring instruments, except for those strange black boxes hanging from our belts. Our cameras required a makeshift darkroom. The absence of cell phones in particular made the real world seem very far away to the others, but I had always preferred to live without them. For weapons, we had knives, a locked container of antique handguns, and one assault rifle. This last a reluctant concession to current security standards. It was expected simply that we would keep a record, like this one, in a journal, like this one. Lightweight, but nearly indestructible, with waterproof paper, a flexible black and white cover, and the blue horizontal lines for writing and the red line to the left to mark the margin. These journals would either return with us or be recovered by the next expedition. We had been cautioned to provide maximum context so that anyone ignorant of Area X could understand our accounts. We had also been ordered not to share our journal entries with one another. Too much shared information could skew our observations, our superiors believed. But I knew from experience how hopeless this pursuit, this attempt to weed out bias was. Nothing that lived and breathed was truly objective, even in a vacuum, even if all that possessed the brain was a self-immolating desire for the truth. "I'm excited by this discovery," the psychologist interjected before we had discussed the tower much further. "Are you excited too?" She had not asked us that particular question before. During training, she had tended to ask questions more like, "How calm do you think you might be in an emergency?" Back then, I had felt as if she were a bad actor playing a role. Now it seemed even more apparent, as if being our leader somehow made her nervous. "It is definitely exciting, and unexpected," I said, trying not to mock her and failing, a little. I was surprised to feel a sense of growing unease, mostly because, in my imagination, my dreams, this discovery would have been among the more banal. In my head, before we had crossed the border, I had seen so many things. Vast cities, peculiar animals, and, once, during a period of illness, an enormous monster that rose from the waves to bear down on our camp. The surveyor, meanwhile, just shrugged and would not answer the psychologist's question. The anthropologist nodded as if she agreed with me. The entrance to the tower leading down exerted a kind of presence, a blank surface that let us write so many things upon it. This presence manifested like a low-grade fever pressing down on all of us. I would tell you the names of the other three, if it mattered, but only the surveyor would last more than the next day or two. Besides, we were always strongly discouraged from using names. We were meant to be focused on our purpose, and anything personal should be left behind. Names belonged to where we had come from, not to who we were while embedded in Area X. Originally, our expedition had numbered 5 and included a linguist. To reach the border, we each had to enter a separate, bright white room with a door at the far end and a single metal chair in the corner. The chair had holes along the sides for straps. The implication of this raised a prickle of alarm, but by then I was set in my determination to reach Area X. The facility that housed these rooms was under the control of the Southern Reach, a clandestine government agency that dealt with all matters connected to Area X. There we waited while innumerable readings were taken, and various blasts of air, some cool, some hot, pressed down on us from vents in the ceiling. At some point the psychologist visited each of us, although I do not remember what was said. Then we exited through the far door into a central staging area, with double doors at the end of a long hallway. Punch the mic, sorry. The psychologist greeted us there, but the linguist never reappeared. She had second thoughts, the psychologist told us, meeting our questions with a firm gaze. She decided to stay behind. This came as a small shock, but there was also relief that it had not been someone else. Of all of our skill sets, linguist seemed at the time most expendable. After a moment, the psychologist said, "Now, clear your minds." This meant she would begin the process of hypnotizing us so we could cross the border. She would then put herself under a kind of self-hypnosis. It had been explained that we would need to cross the border with precautions to protect against our minds tricking us. Apparently hallucinations were common. At least, this was what they told us. I no longer can be sure it was the truth. The actual nature of the border had been withheld from us for security reasons. We knew only that it was invisible to the naked eye. So, when I woke up with the others, it was in full gear, including heavy hiking boots, with the weight of 40-pound backpacks and a multitude of additional supplies hanging from our belts. All three of us lurched, and the anthropologist fell to one knee, while the psychologist patiently waited for us to recover. "I'm sorry," she said. "That was the least startling re-entry I could manage." The surveyor cursed and glared at her. She had a temper that must have been deemed an asset. The anthropologist, as was her way, got to her feet uncomplaining. And I, as was my way, was too busy observing to take this rude awakening personally. For example, I noticed the cruelty of the almost imperceptible smile on the psychologist's lips as she watched us struggle to adjust, the anthropologist still floundering and apologizing for floundering. Later, I realized I might have misread her expression. It might have been pained or self-pitying. We were on a dirt trail, strewn with pebbles, dead leaves, and pine needles damp to the touch. Velvet ants and tiny emerald beetles crawled over them. The tall pines, with their scaly ridges of bark, rose on both sides, and the shadows of flying birds conjured lines between them. The air was so fresh it buffeted the lungs, and we strained to breathe for a few seconds, mostly from surprise. Then, after marking our location with a piece of red cloth tied to a tree, we began to walk forward into the unknown. If the psychologist somehow became incapacitated and could not lead us across at the end of our mission, we had been told to return to await extraction. No one ever explained what form extraction might take, but the implication was that our superiors could observe the extraction point from afar, even though it was inside the border. We had been told not to look back upon arrival, but I snuck a glance anyway, while the psychologist's attention was elsewhere. I don't know quite what I saw. It was hazy, indistinct, and already far behind us. Perhaps a gate, perhaps a trick of the eye. Just a sudden impression of a fizzing block of light, fading fast. The reasons I had volunteered were very separate from my qualifications for the expedition. I believe I qualified because I specialized in transitional environments, and this particular location transitioned several times, meaning that it was home to a complexity of ecosystems. In few other places could you still find habitat where, within the space of walking only 6 or 7 miles, you went from forest to swamp to salt marsh to beach. In Area X, I had been told, I would find marine life that had adjusted to the brackish freshwater, and which, at low tide, swam far up the natural canals formed by the reeds, sharing the same environment with otters and deer. If you walked along the beach, riddled through with the holes of fiddler crabs, you would sometimes look out to see one of the giant reptiles, for they, too, had adapted to their habitat. I understood why no one lived in Area X now, that it was pristine because of that reason, but I kept unremembering it. I had decided instead to make believe that it was simply a protected wildlife refuge, and we were hikers who happened to be scientists. This made sense on another level. We did not know what had happened here, what was still happening here, and any preformed theories would affect my analysis of the evidence as we encountered it. Besides, for my part, it hardly mattered what lies I told myself, because my existence back in the world had become at least as empty as Area X. With nothing left to anchor me, I needed to be here. As for the others, I don't know what they told themselves, and I didn't want to know, but I believe they all at least pretended to some level of curiosity. Curiosity could be a powerful distraction. That night, we talked about the tower, although the other three insisted on calling it a tunnel. The responsibility for the thrust of our investigations resided with each individual, the psychologist's authority describing a wider circle around these decisions. Part of the current rationale for sending the expeditions lay in giving each member some autonomy to decide, which helped to increase the possibility of significant variation. This vague protocol existed in the context of our separate skill sets. For example, although we had all received basic weapons and survival training, the surveyor had far more medical and firearms experience than the rest of us. The anthropologist had once been an architect. Indeed, she had years ago survived a fire in a building she had designed, the only really personal thing I had found out about her. As for the psychologist, we knew the least about her, but I think we all believed she came from some kind of management background. The discussion of the tower was, in a way, our first opportunity to test the limits of disagreement and of compromise. Punch the mic again, sorry. I don't think we should focus on the tunnel, the anthropologist said. We should explore farther first, and we should come back to it with whatever data we gather from our other investigations, including the lighthouse. How predictable, and yet perhaps prescient, for the anthropologist to try to substitute a safer, more comfortable option. Although the idea of mapping seemed perfunctory or repetitive to me, I could not deny the existence of the tower, of which there was no suggestion on any map. Then the surveyor spoke. In this case, I feel we should rule out the tunnel as something invasive or threatening. Before we explore farther, it's like an enemy at our backs otherwise if we press forward. She had come to us from the military, and I could see already the value of that experience. I had thought a surveyor would always side with the idea of further exploration, so this opinion carried weight. I'm impatient to explore the habitats here, I said. But in a sense, given that it is not noted on any map, the tunnel or tower seems important. It is either a deliberate exclusion from our maps and thus known, and that is a message of sorts, or it is something new that wasn't here when the last expedition arrived. The surveyor gave me a look of thanks for the support, but my position had nothing to do with helping her. Something about the idea of a tower that headed straight down played with a twinned sensation of vertigo and a fascination with structure. I could not tell which part I craved and which I feared, and I kept seeing the inside of nautilus shells and other naturally occurring patterns balanced against a sudden leap off a cliff into the unknown. The psychologist nodded, appeared to consider these opinions, and asked, "Does anyone yet have even an inkling of a sensation of wanting to leave?" It was a legitimate question, but jarring nonetheless. All three of us shook our heads. "What about you?" the surveyor asked the psychologist. "What is your opinion?" The psychologist grinned, which seemed odd, but she must have known any of us might have been tasked with observing her own reactions to stimuli. Perhaps the idea that a surveyor, an expert in the surface of things, might have been chosen, rather than a biologist or anthropologist, amused her. I must admit to feeling a great deal of unease at the moment, but I am unsure whether it is because of the effect of the overall environment or the presence of the tunnel. Personally, I would like to rule out the tunnel. Tower. 3-1 then, the anthropologist said, clearly relieved that the decision had been made for her. The surveyor just shrugged. Perhaps I'd been wrong about curiosity. The surveyor didn't seem curious about anything. Bored? I asked. Eager to get on with it, she said to the group as if I'd asked the question for all of us. We were in the communal tent for our talk. It had become dark by then, and there came soon after the strange, mournful call in the night that we knew must have natural causes, but created a little shiver regardless. As if that was the signal to disband, we went back to our own quarters to be alone with our thoughts. I lay awake in my tent for a while, trying to turn the tower into a tunnel, or even a shaft, but with no success. Instead, my mind kept returning to a question: what lies hidden at its base? During our hike from the border to the base camp near the coast, we had experienced almost nothing out of the ordinary. The birds sang as they should. The deer took flight, their white tails exclamation points against the green and brown of the underbrush. The raccoons, bow-legged, swayed about their business, ignoring us. As a group, we felt almost giddy. I think, to be free after so many confining months of training and preparation. While we were in that corridor, in the transitional space, nothing could touch us. We were neither what we had been, nor what we would become once we reached our destination. The day before we arrived at the camp, this mood was briefly shattered by the appearance of an enormous wild boar some distance ahead of us on the trail. It was so far from us that even with our binoculars we could barely identify it at first. But despite poor eyesight, wild pigs have prodigious powers of smell, and it began charging at us from 100 yards away, thundering down the trail towards us. Yet we still had time to think about what we might do, had drawn our long knives, and in the surveyor's case her assault rifle. Bullets would probably stop a 700-pound pig, or perhaps not. We did not feel confident taking our attention from the boar to untie the container of handguns from our gear and open its triple locks. There was no time for the psychologist to prepare any hypnotic suggestion designed to keep us focused and in control. In fact, all she could offer was, "Don't get close to it. Don't let it touch you," while the boar continued to charge. The anthropologist was giggling a bit out of nervousness and the absurdity of experiencing an emergency situation that was taking so long to develop. Only the surveyor had taken direct action. She had dropped to one knee to get a better shot. Our orders included the helpful directive, "Kill only if you are under threat of being killed." I was continuing to watch through the binoculars, and as the boar came closer, its face became stranger and stranger. Its features were somehow contorted, as if the beast was dealing with an extreme of inner torment. Nothing about its muzzle or broad, long face looked at all extraordinary, and yet I had the startling impression of some presence in the way its gaze seemed turned inward and its head willfully pulled to the left, as if there were an invisible bridle. A kind of electricity sparked in its eyes that I could not credit as real. I thought, instead, it must be a byproduct of my now slightly shaky hand on the binoculars. Whatever was consuming the boar also soon consumed its desire to charge. It veered abruptly leftward, with what I can only describe as a great cry of anguish into the underbrush. By the time we reached that spot, the boar was gone, leaving behind a thoroughly thrashed trail. For several hours, my thoughts turned inward toward explanations for what I had seen. Parasites and other hitchhikers of a neurological nature. I was searching for entirely rational biological theories. Then, after a time, the bore faded into the backdrop like all else that we had passed on our way from the border, and I was staring into the future again. The morning after we discovered the tower, we rose early, ate our breakfast, and doused our fire. There was a crisp chill to the air common for the season. The surveyor broke open the weapon stash and gave us each a handgun. She herself continued to hold on to the assault rifle. It had the added benefit of a flashlight under the barrel. We had not expected to have to open that particular container so soon, and although none of us protested, I felt a new tension between us. We knew that members of the second expedition to Area X had committed suicide by gunshot, and members of the third had shot each other. Not until several subsequent expeditions had suffered 0 casualties had our superiors issued firearms again. We were the 12th expedition. So we returned to the tower, all 4 of us. Sunlight came down, dappled through the moss and leaves, created archipelagos of light on the flat surface of the entrance. It remained unremarkable, inert, in no way ominous, and yet it took an act of will to stand there, staring at the entry point. I noticed the anthropologist, checking her black box, was relieved to see it did not display a glowing red light. If it had, we would have had to abort our exploration, move on to other things. I did not want that, despite the touch of fear. "How deep do you think it goes down?" the anthropologist asked. "Remember that we are to put our faith in your measurements," the psychologist answered with a slight frown. "The measurements do not lie. The structure is 61.4 feet in diameter. It is raised 7.9 inches from the ground. The stairwell appears to have been positioned at or close to due north, which may tell us something about its creation eventually. It is made of stone and coquina, not of metal or of bricks. These are facts. That it wasn't on the maps means only that a storm may have uncovered the entrance." I found the psychologist's faith in measurements and her rationalization for the tower's absence of maps oddly endearing. Perhaps she meant merely to reassure us, but I would like to believe she was trying to reassure herself. Her position, to lead and possibly to know more than us, must have been difficult and lonely. "I hope it's only about 6 feet deep so we can continue mapping," the surveyor said, trying to be light-hearted, but then she and we all recognized the term 6 feet under, ghosting through her syntax, and a silence settled over us. "I want you to know that I cannot stop thinking of it as a tower," I confessed. I can't see it as a tunnel." It seemed important to make the distinction before our descent, even if it influenced their evaluation of my mental state. I saw a tower plunging into the ground. The thought that we stood at its summit made me a little dizzy. All 3 stared at me then, as if I were the strange cry at dusk, and after a moment the psychologist said, grudgingly, "If it helps make you more comfortable, then I don't see the harm." A silence came over us again, there under the canopy of trees. A beetle spiraled up towards the branches, trailing dust motes. I think we all realized that only now had we truly entered Area X. "I'll go first and see what's down there," the surveyor said, finally, and we were happy to defer to her. The initial stairwell curved steeply downward, and the steps were narrow, so the surveyor would have to back her way into the tower. We used sticks to clear the spiderwebs as she lowered herself into position on the stairwell. She teetered there, weapon slung across her back, looking up at us. She had tied her hair back, and it made the lines of her face seem tight and drawn. Was this the moment when we were supposed to stop her? To come up with some other plan? If so, none of us had the nerve. With a strange smirk, almost as if judging us, the surveyor descended until we could only see her face framed in the gloom below, and then not even that. She left an empty space that was shocking to me, as if the reverse had actually happened, as if a face had suddenly floated into view out of the darkness. I gasped, which drew a stare from the psychologist. The anthropologist was too busy staring down into the stairwell to notice any of it. "Is everything okay?" the psychologist called out to the surveyor. Everything had been fine just a second before. Why would anything be different now? The surveyor made a sharp grunt in answer, as if agreeing with me. For a few moments more, we could still hear the burps. For a few moments more, we could still hear the surveyor struggling on those short steps. Then came silence, and then another movement, at a different rhythm, which for a terrifying moment seemed like it might come from a second source. But then the surveyor called up to us. "Clear to this level." This level. Something within me thrilled to the fact that my vision of a tower was not yet disproven. That was the signal for me to descend with the anthropologist while the psychologist stood watch. "Time to go," the psychologist said, as perfunctorily as if we were in school and a class was letting out. The emotion that I could not quite identify surged through me, and for a moment I saw dark spots in my field of vision. I followed the anthropologist so eagerly down it through the remains of webs and the embalmed husks of insects into the cool brackishness of that place that I almost tripped her. My last view of the world above, the psychologist peering down at me with a slight frown, and behind her the trees, the blue of the sky almost blinding against the darkness of the sides of the stairwell. Below, shadows spread across the walls. The temperature dropped, and sound became muffled, the soft steps absorbing our tread. Approximately 20 feet beneath the surface, the structure opened out into a lower level. The ceiling was about 80 feet high, which meant a good 12 feet of stone lay above us. The flashlight of the surveyor's assault rifle illuminated the space, but she was faced away from us, surveying the walls, which were an off-white and devoid of any adornment. A few cracks indicated either the passage of time or some sudden stressor. The level appeared to be the same circumference as the exposed top, which again supported the idea of a single solid structure buried in the earth. "It goes farther," the surveyor said, and pointed with her rifle to the far corner, directly opposite the opening where we had come out onto that level. A rounded archway stood there, and a darkness that suggested downward steps. A tower which made this level not so much a floor as a landing, or part of the turret. She started to walk up toward the archway, while I was still engrossed in examining the walls with my flashlight. Their very blankness mesmerized me. I tried to imagine the builder of this place, but could not. I thought, again, of the silhouette of the lighthouse, as I had seen it during the late afternoon of our first day at base camp. We assumed that the structure in question was a lighthouse because the map showed a lighthouse at that location, and because everyone immediately recognized what a lighthouse should look like. In fact, the surveyor and anthropologist had both expressed a kind of relief when they had seen the lighthouse. Its appearance on both the map and in reality reassured them, anchored them. Being familiar with its function further reassured them. With the tower, we knew none of these things. We could not intuit its full outline. We had no sense of its purpose, and now that we had begun to descend into it, the tower still failed to reveal any hint of these things. The psychologist might recite the measurements of the top of the tower, but those numbers meant nothing, had no wider context. Without context, clinging to those numbers was a form of madness. There is a regularity to the circle seen from the inside walls that suggests precision in the creation of the building, the anthropologist said. The building. Already she had begun to abandon the idea of it being a tunnel. All of my thoughts came spilling out of my mouth, some final discharge from the state that had overtaken me above. But what is its purpose? And is it believable that it would not be on the maps? Could one of the prior expeditions have built it and hidden it? I asked all of this and more, not expecting an answer. Even though no threat had revealed itself, it seemed important to eliminate any possible moment of silence, as if somehow the blankness of the walls fed off of silence, and that something might appear in the spaces between our words if we were not careful. Had I expressed this anxiety to the psychologist, she would have been worried, I know. But I was more attuned to solitude than any of us, and I would have characterized that place in that moment of our exploration as watchful. A gasp from the surveyor cut me off in mid-question, no doubt much to the anthropologist's relief. "Look!" the surveyor said, trailing her flashlight down into the archway. We hurried over and stared past her, adding our own illumination. A stairway did indeed lead down, this time at a gentle curve with much broader steps, but still made of the same materials. At about shoulder height, perhaps 5 feet high, clinging to the inner wall of the tower, I saw what I first took to be dimly sparkling green vines progressing down into the darkness. I had a sudden, absurd memory of the floral wallpaper treatment that had lined the bathroom of my house when I had shared it with my husband. Then, as I stared, the vines resolved further, and I saw that they were words, in cursive, the letters raised about 6 inches off the wall. "Hold the light," I said, and pushed past them, down the first few steps. Blood was rushing through my head again, a roaring confusion in my ears. It was an act of supreme control to walk those few paces. I couldn't tell you what impulse drove me, except that I was the biologist, and this looked oddly organic. If the linguist had been there, perhaps I would have deferred to her. "Don't touch it, whatever it is," the anthropologist warned. I nodded, but I was too enthralled with the discovery. If I'd had the impulse to touch the words on the wall, I would not have been able to stop myself. As I came close, did it surprise me that I could understand the language the words were written in? Yes. Did it fill me with a kind of elation and dread intertwined? Yes. I tried to suppress the 1,000 new questions rising up inside of me. In as calm a voice as I could manage, aware of the importance of that moment, I read from the beginning aloud, "Where lies the strangling fruit that came from the hand of the sinner? I shall bring forth the seeds of the dead to share with the worms that—" Then the darkness took it. "Words? Words?" the anthropologist said. "Yes, words." "What are they made of?" the surveyor asked. "Did they need to be made of anything?" The illumination cast on the continuing sequence quavered and shook. "Where lies the strangling fruit" became bathed in shadow and in light, as if a battle raged for its meaning. "Give me a moment, I need to get closer." Did I? Yes, I needed to get closer. What are they made of? I hadn't even thought of this, though I should have. I was still trying to pass the lingual meaning, had not transitioned to the idea of taking a physical sample. But what relief at the question, because it helped me fight the compulsion to keep reading, to descend into the greater darkness and keep descending until I had read all there was to read. Already those initial phrases were infiltrating my mind in unexpected ways, finding fertile ground. So I stepped closer, peered at where lies the strangling fruit. I saw the letters, connected by their cursive script, were made from what would have looked to the layperson like rich green fern-like moss, but in fact was probably a type of fungi or other eukaryotic organism. The curling filaments were all packed very close together and rising out from the wall. A loamy smell came from the words along with an underlying hint of rotting honey. This miniature forest swayed almost imperceptibly, like sea grass in a gentle ocean current. Other things existed in this miniature ecosystem, half hidden by the green filaments. Most of these creatures were translucent and shaped like tiny hands embedded by the base of the palm. Golden nodules capped the fingers on these hands. I leaned in closer, like a fool, like someone who had not had months of survival training or ever studied biology. Someone tricked into thinking that words should be read. I was unlucky. Or was I lucky? Triggered by a disturbance in the flow of air, a nodule in the W chose that moment to burst open, and a tiny spray of golden spores spewed out. I pulled back, but I thought I had felt something enter my nose, experienced a pinprick of escalation in the smell of rotting honey. Unnerved, I stepped back even farther, borrowing some of the surveyor's best curses, but only in my head. My natural instinct was always for concealment. Already I was imagining the psychologist's reaction to my contamination if revealed to the group. "Some sort of fungi," I said, finally, taking a deep breath so I could control my voice. "The letters are made from fruiting bodies." Who knew if it were actually true? It was just my closest thing to an answer. My voice must have seemed calmer than my actual thoughts, because there was no hesitation in the response. No hint in their tone of having seen the spores erupt into my face. I had been so close. The spores had been so tiny, so insignificant. "I shall bring forth the seeds of the dead." Words? Made of fungi, the surveyor said, stupidly echoing me. "There is no recorded human language that uses this method of writing," the anthropologist said. "Is there any animal that communicates in this way?" I had to laugh. No, there was no animal that communicates in this way. Or if there were, I could not recall its name, and never did later either. "Are you joking? This is a joke, right?" the surveyor said. She looked poised to come down and prove me wrong, but didn't move from her position. "Fruiting bodies," I replied, almost as if in a trance. "Forming words." A calm had settled over me. A competing sensation, as if I couldn't breathe, or didn't want to, was clearly psychological, not physiological. I had noticed no physical changes, and on some level it didn't matter. I knew it was unlikely we had an antidote to something so unknown waiting back at the camp. More than anything, the information I was trying to process immobilized me. The words were composed of symbiotic fruiting bodies from a species unknown to me. Second, the dusting of spores on the words meant that the farther down into the tower we explored, the more the air would be full of potential contaminants. Was there any reason to relay this information to the others when it would only alarm them? No, I decided, perhaps selfishly. It was more important to make sure they were not directly exposed until we could come back with the proper equipment. Any other evaluation depended on environmental and biological factors about which I was increasingly convinced I had inadequate data. I came back up the stairs to the landing. The surveyor and the anthropologist looked expectant, as if I could tell them more. The anthropologist in particular was on edge. Her gaze couldn't alight on any one thing, but kept moving and moving. Perhaps I could have fabricated information that would have stopped that incessant search. But what could I tell them about the words on the wall, except that they were either impossible or insane, or both? I would have preferred the words be written in an unknown language. This would have presented less of a mystery for us to solve, in a way. "We should go back up," I said. It was not that I recommended this as the best course of action, but because I wanted to limit their exposure to the spores until I could see what long-term effects they might have on me. I also knew if I stayed there much longer, I might experience a compulsion to go back down the stairs to continue reading the words, and they would have to physically restrain me, and I did not know what I would do then. There was no argument from the other two, but as we climbed back up, I had a moment of vertigo despite being in such an enclosed space, a kind of panic for a moment, in which the walls suddenly had a fleshy aspect to them, as if we travelled inside of the gullet of a beast. When we told the psychologist what we had seen, when I recited some of the words, she seemed at first frozen in an oddly attentive way. Then she decided to descend to view the words. I struggled with whether I should warn her against this action. Finally, I said, "Only observe from the top of the stairs. We don't know whether there are toxins. When we come back, we should wear breathing masks. These, at least, we had inherited from the last expedition, in a sealed container. Paralysis is not a cogent analysis, she said to me with a pointed stare. I felt a kind of itchiness come over me, but I said nothing, did nothing. The others did not even seem to realize she had spoken. It was only later that I realized the psychologist had tried to bind me with a hypnotic suggestion meant for me and me alone. My reaction, apparently, fell within the range of acceptable responses, for she descended while we waited anxiously above. What would we do if she did not return? A sense of ownership swept over me. I was agitated by the idea that she might experience the same need to read further and would act upon it. Even though I didn't know what the words meant, I wanted them to mean something so that I might more swiftly remove doubt, bring reason back into all of my equations. Such thoughts distracted me from thinking about the effects of the spores on my system. Thankfully, the other two had no desire to talk as we waited, and after just 15 minutes, the psychologist awkwardly pushed her way up out of the stairwell and into the light, blinking as her vision adjusted. Interesting, she said in a flat tone as she loomed over us, wiping the cobwebs from her clothing. I have never seen anything like that before. She seemed as if she might continue, but then decided against it. What she had already said verged on the moronic. Apparently I was not alone in that assessment. Interesting, the anthropologist said. No one has ever seen anything like that in the entire history of the world. No one. Ever. And you call it interesting? She seemed close to working herself into a bout of hysteria, while the surveyor just stared at both of them as if they were the alien organisms. Do you need me to calm you? The psychologist asked. There was a steely tone to her words that made the anthropologist mumble something non-committal and stare at the ground. I stepped into the silence with my own suggestions. We need time to think about this. We need time to decide what to do next. I meant, of course, that I needed time to see if the spores I had inhaled would affect me in a way significant enough to confess to what had happened. There may not be enough time for that, time in the world for that, the surveyor said. Of all of us, I think she had best grasped the implications of what we had seen, that we might now be living in a kind of nightmare. But the psychologist ignored her and sided with me. We do need time. We should spend the rest of our day doing what we were sent here to do. So we returned to camp for lunch and then focused on ordinary things while I kept monitoring my body for any changes. Do I feel too cold or too hot? Was that ache in my knee from an old injury suffered in the field or something new? I even checked the black box monitor, but it remained inert. Nothing radical had yet changed in me, and as we took our samples and readings in the general vicinity of the camp, as if to stray too far would be to come under the tower's control, I gradually relaxed and told myself that the spores had had no effect, even though I knew that the incubation period for some species could be months or years. I suppose I thought merely that for the next few days at least, I might be safe. The surveyor concentrated on adding detail and nuance to the maps our superiors had given us. The anthropologist went off to examine the remains of some cabins a quarter-mile away. The psychologist stayed in her tent, writing in her journal. Perhaps she was reporting on how she was surrounded by idiots, or just setting out every moment of our morning discoveries. For my part, I spent an hour observing a tiny red and green tree frog on the back of a broad, thick leaf, and another hour following the path of an iridescent black damselfly that should not have been found at sea level. The rest of the time, I spent up a pine tree, binoculars focused on the coast and the lighthouse. I liked climbing. I also liked the ocean, and I found staring at it had a calming effect. The air was so clean, so fresh, while the world back beyond the border was what it had always been during the modern era. Dirty, tired, imperfect, winding down, at war with itself. Back there I had always felt as if my work amounted to a futile attempt to save us from who we are. The richness of Area X's biosphere was reflected in the wealth of bird life, from warblers and flickers to cormorants and black ibis. I could also see a bit into the salt marshes, and my attention there was rewarded by a minute-long glimpse of a pair of otters. At one point, they glanced up, and I had a strange sensation that they could see me watching them. It was a feeling I often had when out in the wilderness, that things were not quite what they seemed, and I had to fight against the sensation, because it could overwhelm my scientific objectivity. There was also something else, moving ponderously through the reeds, but it was closer to the lighthouse, and in deep cover. I could not tell what it was, and after a while its disturbance of the vegetation ceased, and I lost track of it entirely. I imagined it might be another wild pig, as they could be good swimmers, and were just as omnivorous in their choice of habitats as in their diets. On the whole, by dusk, this strategy of busying ourselves in our tasks had worked to calm our nerves. The tension lifted somewhat, and we even joked a little bit at dinner. "I wish I knew what you were thinking," the anthropologist confessed to me, and I replied, "No, you don't," which was met with laughter that surprised me. I didn't want their voices in my head, their ideas of me, nor their own stories or problems. Why would they want mine? But I did not mind that a sense of camaraderie had begun to take hold, even if it would prove short-lived. The psychologist allowed us each a couple of beers from the store of alcohol, which loosened us up to the point that I even clumsily expressed the idea that we might maintain some sort of contact once we had completed our mission. I had stopped checking myself for physiological or psychological reactions to the spores by then, and found that the surveyor and I got along better than I had expected. I still didn't like the anthropologist very much, but mostly in the context of the mission, not anything she had said to me. I felt that, once in the field, much as some athletes were good in practice and not during the game, she had exhibited a lack of mental toughness thus far, although just volunteering for such a mission meant something. When the nightly cry from the marshes came a little after nightfall, while we sat around our fire, we at first called back to it in a drunken show of bravado. The beast in the marshes now seemed like an old friend compared to the tower. We were confident that eventually we would photograph it, document its behavior, tag it, and assign it a place in the taxonomy of living things. It would become known in a way we feared the tower would not. But we stopped calling back when the intensity of its moan heightened in a way that suggested anger, as if it knew we were mocking it. Nervous laughter all round then, and the psychologist took that as her cue to ready us for the next day. Tomorrow we will go back to the tunnel. We will go deeper, taking certain precautions, wearing breathing masks as suggested. We will record the writing on the walls and get a sense of how old it is, I hope. Also, perhaps a sense of how deep the tunnel descends. In the afternoon we'll return to our general investigations of the area. We'll repeat this schedule every day until we think we know enough about the tunnel and how it fits into Area X. Tower, not tunnel. She could have been talking about investigating an abandoned shopping centre for all of the emphasis she put on it, and yet something about her tone seemed rehearsed. Then she abruptly stood and said 3 words: "Consolidation of authority." Immediately the surveyor and the anthropologist beside me went slack, their eyes unfocused. I was shocked, but I mimicked them, hoping that the psychologist had not noticed the lag. I felt no compulsion whatsoever, but clearly we had been pre-programmed to enter a hypnotic state in response to those words uttered by the psychologist. Her demeanour more assertive than just a moment before, the psychologist said, "You will retain a memory of having discussed several options with regard to the tunnel. You will find that you ultimately agreed with me about the best course of action, and that you felt quite confident about this course of action. You will experience a sensation of calm whenever you think about this decision, and you will remain calm once back inside the tunnel, although you will react to any stimuli as per your training. You will not take undue risks. You will continue to see a structure that is made of coquina and stone. You will trust your colleagues completely and feel a continued sense of fellowship with them. When you emerge from the structure, any time you see a bird in flight, it will trigger a strong feeling that you are doing the right thing and that you are in the right place. When I snap my fingers, you will have no memory of this conversation, but will follow my directives. You will feel very tired, and you will want to retire to your tents to get a good night's sleep before tomorrow's activities. You will not dream. You will not have nightmares. I stared straight ahead as she said these words, and when she snapped her fingers, I took my cue from the actions of the other two. I don't believe the psychologist suspected anything, and I retired to my tent just as the others retired to their tents. Now I had new data to process along with the tower. We knew that the psychologist's role was to provide balance and calm in a situation that might become stressful, and that part of this role included hypnotic suggestion. I could not blame her for performing that role, but to see it laid out so nakedly troubled me. It is one thing to think you might be receiving hypnotic suggestion, and quite another to experience it as an observer. What level of control could she exert over us? What did she mean by saying that we would continue to think of the tower as made of coquina and stone? Most important, however, I now could guess at one way in which the spores had affected me. They had made me immune to the psychologist's hypnotic suggestions. They had made me into a kind of conspirator against her. Even if her purposes were benign, I felt a wave of anxiety whenever I thought of confessing that I was resistant to hypnosis, especially since it meant any underlying conditioning hidden in our training also was affecting me less and less. I now hid not one but two secrets, and that meant I was steadily, irrevocably becoming estranged from the expedition and its purpose. Estrangement, in all its many forms, was nothing new for these missions. I understood this from having been given an opportunity, along with the others, to view videotape of the re-entry interviews with the members of the 11th expedition. Once those individuals had been identified as having returned to their former lives, they were quarantined and questioned about their experiences. Reasonably enough, in most cases, family members had called the authorities, finding their loved ones' return uncanny or frightening. Any papers found on these returnees had been confiscated by our superiors for examination and study. This information, too, we were allowed to see. The interviews were fairly short, and in them all eight expedition members told the same story. They had experienced no unusual phenomenon while in Area X, taken no unusual readings, and reported no unusual internal conflicts. But after a period of time, each one of them had had the intense desire to return home and had set out to do so. None of them could explain how they had managed to come back across the border, or why they had gone straight home instead of first reporting to their superiors. One by one, they had simply abandoned the expedition, left their journals behind, and drifted home. Somehow. Throughout these interviews, their expressions were friendly and their gazes direct. If their words seemed a little flat, then this went with the kind of general calm, the almost dreamlike demeanour each had returned with, even the compact, wiry man who had served as that expedition's military expert, a person who'd had a mercurial and energetic personality. In terms of their effects, I could not tell any of the eight apart. I had the sense that they now saw the world through a kind of veil, that they spoke to their interviewers from across a vast distance in time and space. As for the papers, they proved to be sketches of landscapes within Area X, or brief descriptions. Some were cartoons of animals, or caricatures of fellow expedition members. All of them had, at some point, drawn the lighthouse, or written about it. Looking for hidden meaning in these papers was the same as looking for hidden meaning in the natural world around us. If it existed, it could be activated only by the eye of the beholder. At the time, I was seeking oblivion, and I sought in those blank, anonymous faces, even the most painfully familiar, a kind of benign escape. A death that would not mean being dead. And that's the end of chapter 1 of Annihilation. And yeah, that brings us to a break. Yeah, I'm just gonna scroll back and see what you were saying in chat. Always struggle with visualizing the tower that goes down. Well, you know, clearly that's the conflict. Wait, it's on Genius, as in the lyrics website. You found it on there with annotations from Jeff Vandermeer. Is that wild? Okay. D&D party vibes. Yeah. Yeah. In your head, the stairs spiral, so the text would have been right to left, and you're sticking with it. That is, I glanced up and saw that, and yeah, I always find whenever I'm reading that bit where she's talking about like the text on the wall and reading it going down, I always struggle to think of how it's written. Because, yeah, to me, I don't think he says anywhere that it's whether it spirals clockwise or anti-clockwise, and I always think of it as being on, like, the right wall, spiraling anti-clockwise down. But then that's a really weird way to write, because you have, like, first, you're writing right to left then, surely, or, like, so it must, in theory, be written on the left and going like clockwise, but then yeah, but again I sort of find it may be a language that goes right to left. Yeah, exactly. Like maybe that weirdness is intentional. Very interesting to hear this after seeing the movie. It is very different to the film there, and yeah, it is if you've seen the film, it is well worth at least getting the book and giving it a read. Because yeah, it is very different to the film. Like there's similar concepts, but it's a very different story. And yeah, you're not just like reading it going, oh, it's like that bit from the film. Like Alex Garland changed a lot for the film, which I think rankled Vandermeer a fair bit. You really enjoyed this? Nice. Yeah, I mean that's kind of partly what I'm hoping to do with some of these, is like introduce some people to things that you might not have otherwise encountered or read and gone like, oh, yo, this is cool actually. Is automatically assumed clockwise with writing on the outside wall. I don't know why I didn't. Yeah, like Arian, so imagine the stairs before the text, that they're on like the right side and spiraling down in like an anti-clockwise fashion. Pick it up from the library later. Hell yeah! So the copy that I was reading from is it's an ex-library version that I got from it would have been Better World Books, which is now a Netflix original film. Fear, What's Inside, Annihilation book. This is like the book of the film version, so it's got like an image on the front that is taken from the film. But what I also have is the giant bumper Area X trilogy, although there is now a fourth book. Also, it's Southern Reach trilogy, Area X compilation, which has the first three books, which Lucy like blasted through. She reads quick, and these are extremely readable books. Like she got through Annihilation in literally like an afternoon. She reads at a superhuman level, and I'm slower than that. But yeah, so basically what I'm saying is, if you enjoyed that, there's copies available out there. There's a lot, so dig in. But for now, we're going to go to a break, and we're going to come back for something very different. I don't know if I'm going to read the first 2 chapters of Ubik or just 1. But that is, yeah, a very different... Oh, I keep punching the mic. I don't know if I got it in a weird place. A very different, very different story from a very different era. So yeah, go take a break. 5 minutes or so is what I'm going to give you, and I'll see you back here then. Rotate your fluid, stretch your limbs, and see you back here in a minute, friends. Bye for now. everybody. We're back. It's too warm. I've just gone and, like, doused myself in water and sat in front of a fan for a minute. Remembering that these are both actions I can take. But that it's still so much. Just enough time for Dracula. Congratulations. Yeah, so we're back. That was some Annihilation for everybody. You know, why not? Hey. And thank you, Angeline. I was hoping someone would pick up what I was referencing. But yeah, that was some of that. I highly recommend the book and the books. Guy on Book Channel recommends books. Who knew? But yeah, I might as well just crack on with the next thing, because we have... I'll decide as I go whether we want one or two chapters from Ubik, which, as I say, it's sort of... It doesn't really get into... What is this, book talk? Yeah, I know, right, disgusting. It doesn't really get into, as far as I'm concerned, like the real meat of the story in this part, which is why I wanted to do two chapters at least instead of one, rather than just... some words written by a guy who took a lot of drugs and then wrote some stories. But yeah, this is one that I would have read, oh boy, yeah, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 years ago. When was this edition, this collection that I'm reading, published? Copyright 2004. Yeah, I remember picking this up like new from the bookshop. So 21 years old. This is a yeah. Ooh, I don't like where this thought process is going. But yeah, I don't have a text for this, but the last one that I'm planning to read tonight, I do, so I'll put that when I get there. We're getting old. I don't like it. I wish for it to stop for a bit. So let's have this. This is the first one or two chapters of Ubik by Philip K. Dick. Friends, this is cleanup time, and we're discounting all our silent electric Ubiks by this much money. Yes, we're throwing away the blue book. And remember, every Ubik on our lot has been used only as directed. At 3:30 a.m., on the night of 5th of June 1992, the top telepath in the Sol system fell off the map in the offices of Runciter Associates in New York City. That started vidphones ringing. The Runciter organization had lost track of too many of Hollis's size during the last 2 months. This added disappearance wouldn't do. Mr. Runciter, sorry to bother you, the technician in charge of the night shift at the map room coughed nervously as the massive, sloppy head of Glenn Runciter swam up to fill the vid screen. We got this news from one of our inertials. Let me look. He fiddled with a disarranged stack of tapes from the recorder, which monitored incoming messages. Our Miss Dawn reported it, as you may recall. As you may recall, she had followed him to Green River, Utah, where... Sleepily, Runciter grated. Who? I can't keep in mind at all times which inertials are following what teep or precog. With his hand, he smoothed down his ruffled grey mass of wire-like hair. Skip the rest and tell me which of Hollis's people is missing now. S. Dol Melipony, the technician said. What? Melipony's gone? You kid me. I not kid you, the technician assured him. Edie Dawn and 2 other inertials followed him to a motel named the Bonds of Erotic Polymorphic Experience, a 60-unit subsurface structure catering to businessmen and their hookers who don't want to be entertained. Edie and her colleagues didn't think he was active, but just to be on the safe side, we had one of our own telepaths, Mr. G.G. Ashwood, go in and read him. Ashwood found a scramble pattern surrounding Melipony's mind, so he couldn't do anything. He therefore went back to Topeka, Kansas, where he's currently scouting a new possibility. Runciter, more awake now, had lit a cigarette. Chin in hand, he sat propped up somberly, smoke drifting across the scanner of his end of the bi-channel circuit. You're sure the teep was Melipony? No one seems to know what he looks like. He must use a different physiognomic template every month. What about his field? We asked Joe Chip to go in there and run tests on the magnitude and minitude of the field being generated there at the Bonds of Erotic Polymorphic Experience Motel. Chip says it registered, at its height, 68.2 BLR units of telepathic aura, which only Melipony, among all the known telepaths, can produce. The technician finished. So that's where we stuck Melipony's ident flag on the map. And now it is gone. Did you look on the floor, behind the map? It's gone electronically. The man it represents is no longer on Earth, or, as far as we can make out, on a colony world either. Runciter said, I'll consult my dead wife. It's the middle of the night. Moratoriums are closed now. Not in Switzerland, Runciter said, with a grimacing smile, as if some repellent midnight fluid had crept up into his aged throat. Good eve. Runciter hung up. As owner of the beloved Brethren Moratorium, Herbert Schönheit von Vogelsang, of course, perpetually came to work before his employees. At this moment, with the chilly, echoing building just beginning to stir, a worried-looking clerical individual with nearly opaque glasses and wearing a tabby fur blazer and pointed yellow shoes waited at the reception counter, a claim check stub in his hand. Obviously, he had shown up to holiday greet a relative. Resurrection Day, the holiday on which the half-lifers were publicly honoured, lay just around the corner. The rush would soon be beginning. Yes, sir, Herbert said to him with an affable smile. I'll take your stub personally. It's an elderly lady, the customer said, about 80, very small and wizened. My grandmother. It will only be a moment. Herbert made his way back to the cold pack bins to search out number 3054039-B. When he located the correct party, he scrutinized the lading report attached. It gave only 15 days of half-life remaining. Not very much, he reflected. Automatically, he pressed a portable protophazon amplifier into the transparent plastic hull of the casket, tuned it, listened at the proper frequency for indication of cephalic activity. Faintly from the speaker a voice said, then Tilly sprained her ankle. We never thought it'd heal. She was so foolish about it, wanting to start walking immediately. Satisfied, he unplugged the amplifier and located a union man to perform the actual task of carting 3054039-B to the consultation lounge, where the customer would be put in touch with the old lady. You checked her out, did you? The customer asked as he paid the postcred's due. Personally, Herbert answered, functioning perfectly. He flicked a series of switches, then stepped back. Happy Resurrection Day, sir. Thank you. The customer seated himself facing the casket, which steamed in its envelope of cold pack. He pressed an earphone against the side of his head and spoke firmly into the microphone. Flora, dear, can you hear me? I think I can hear you already, Flora? When I pass, Herbert Schönheit von Vogelsang said to himself, I think I'll will my heirs to revive me one day a century. That way I can observe the fate of all mankind. But that meant a rather high maintenance cost to the heirs, and he knew what that meant. Sooner or later they would rebel, have his body taken out of cold pack and, God forbid, buried. Burial is barbaric, Herbert muttered aloud, remnant of the primitive origins of our culture. Yes, sir, his secretary agreed at her typewriter. In the consultation lounge, several customers now communed with their half-lifer relations, in rapt quiet, distributed at intervals, each with his separate casket. It was a tranquil sight, these faithfuls, coming as they did so regularly to pay homage. They brought messages, news of what took place in the outside world. They cheered the gloomy half-lifers in these intervals of cerebral activity, and they paid Herbert Schönheit von Vogelsang. It was a profitable business, operating a moratorium. My dad seems a little frail, a young man said, catching Herbert's attention. "I wonder if you could take a moment of your time to check him over. I'd really appreciate it." "Certainly," Herbert said, accompanying the customer across the lounge to his deceased relative. The lading for this one showed only a few days remaining. That explained the vitiated quality of cerebration. But, still, he turned up the gain of the protophasal amplifier, and the voice from the half-lifer became a trifle stronger in the earphone. He's almost at an end, Herbert thought. It seemed obvious to him that the son did not want to see the lading. He did not actually care to know that contact with his dad was diminishing, finally. So Herbert said nothing. He merely walked off, leaving the son to commune. Why tell him that this was probably the last time he would come here? He would find out soon enough in any case. A truck had now appeared in the loading platform at the rear of the moratorium. 2 men hopped down from it, wearing familiar pale blue uniforms. Atlas Interplan Van and Storage, Herbert perceived, delivering another half-lifer who had just now passed, or here to pick up one which had expired. Leisurely, he stared in that direction to supervise. At that moment, however, his secretary called to him. "Herr Schönheit von Vogelsang, sorry to break into your meditation, but a customer wishes you to assist in revving up his relative." Her voice took on special coloration as she said, "The customer is Mr. Glenn Runsiter, all the way here from the North American Confederation." A tall, elderly man with large hands and a quick, sprightly stride came toward him. He wore a vari-coloured Dacron wash-and-wear suit, knit cummerbund, and dip-dyed cheesecloth cravat. His head, massive like a tomcat's, thrust forward as he peered through slightly protruding, round and warm and highly alert eyes. Runsiter kept, on his face, a professional expression of greeting, a fast attentiveness which fixed on Herbert, then almost at once strayed past him, as if Runsiter had already fastened on to future matters. "How is Ella?" Runsiter boomed, sounding as if he possessed a voice electronically augmented. "Ready to be cranked up for a talk? She's only 20. She ought to be in better shape than you or me." He chuckled, but it had an abstract quality. He always smiled, and he always chuckled. His voice always boomed, but inside he did not notice anyone, did not care. It was his body which smiled, nodded, and shook hands. Nothing touched his mind, which remained remote, aloof but amiable. He propelled Herbert along with him, sweeping his way in great strides into the chilled bins where the half-lifers, including his wife, lay. "You have not been here for some time, Mr. Runsiter," Herbert pointed out. He could not recall the data on Mrs. Runsiter's lading sheet, how much half-life she retained. Runsiter, his wide, flat hand pressing against Herbert's back to urge him along, said, "This is a moment of importance, von Vogelsang. We, my associates and myself, are in a line of business that surpasses all rational understanding. I'm not at liberty to make disclosures at this time, but we consider matters at present to be ominous, but not, however, hopeless. Despair is not indicated, not by any means. Where's Ella?" He halted, glancing rapidly about. "I'll bring her from a bin to the consultation lounge for you," Herbert said. "Customers should not be here in the bins. Do you have your numbered claim check, Mr. Runsiter?" "God, no," Runsiter said. "I lost it months ago. But you know who my wife is. You can find her. Ella Runsiter, about 20, brown hair and eyes." He looked around him impatiently. "Where did you put the lounge? It used to be located where I could find it." "Show Mr. Runsiter to the consultation lounge," Herbert said to one of his employees, who had come meandering by, curious to see what the world-renowned owner of an anti-psi organization looked like. Peering into the lounge, Runsiter said with aversion, "It's full. I can't talk to Ella in there." He strode after Herbert, who had made for the moratorium's files. "Mr. von Vogelsang," he said, overtaking him and once more dropping his big paw onto the man's shoulders. Herbert felt the weight of the hand, its persuading vigour. "Isn't there a more private sanctum sanctorum for confidential communications? What I have to discuss with Ella, my wife, is not a matter which we at Runciter Associates are ready at this time to reveal to the world. Caught up in the urgency of Runciter's voice and presence, Herbert found himself readily mumbling, "I can make Mrs. Runciter available to you at once in one of our offices, sir." He wondered what had happened. What pressure had forced Runciter out of his bailiwick to make this belated pilgrimage to the beloved Brethren Moratorium to crank up, as Runciter crudely phrased it, his half-life wife. A business crisis of some sort, he theorized. Ads over TV and in the homeopapes by the various anti-psi prudence establishments had shrilly squawked their harangues of late. "Defend your privacy," the ads yammered on the hour from all media. "Is a stranger tuning in on you? Are you really alone?" That's for the telepaths, and then the queasy worry about precogs. Are your actions being predicted by someone you never met? Someone you would not want to meet or invite into your home? Terminate anxiety. Contacting your nearest prudence organization will first tell you if in fact you are the victim of unauthorized intrusions, and then, on your instructions, nullify these intrusions, at moderate cost to you. Prudence organizations. He liked the term. It had dignity, and it was accurate. He knew this from personal experience. 2 years ago, a telepath had infiltrated his moratorium staff for reasons which he had never discovered. To monitor confidences between half-lifers and their visitors, probably. Perhaps those of one specific half-lifer. Anyhow, a scout from one of the anti-psi organizations had picked up the telepathic field, and he had been notified. Upon his signing of a work contract, an anti-telepath had been dispatched, had installed himself on the moratorium premises. The telepath had not been located, but it had been nullified, exactly as the TV ads promised. And so, eventually, the defeated telepath had gone away. The moratorium was now psi-free, and, to be sure it stayed so, the anti-psi prudence organization surveyed his establishment routinely once a month. "Thank you very much, Mr. Vogelsang," Runciter said, following Herbert through an outer office in which Clarke's worked to an empty in a room that smelled of drab and unnecessary microdocuments. Of course, Herbert thought musingly to himself, I took their word for it that a telepath got in here. They showed me a graph they had obtained, citing it as proof. Maybe they faked it, made up the graph in their own labs, and I took their word for it that the telepath left. He came, he left, and I paid 2,000 poscreds. Could the prudence organizations be, in fact, rackets? Claiming a need for their services when sometimes no need actually exists? Pondering this, he set off in the direction of the files once more. This time Runciter did not follow him. Instead, he thrashed about noisily, making his big frame comfortable in terms of a meagre chair. Runciter sighed, and it seemed to Herbert, suddenly, that the massively built old man was tired, despite his customary show of energy. I guess when you get up into that bracket, Herbert decided, you have to act in a certain way. You have to appear more than a human, with merely ordinary failings. Probably Runciter's body contained a dozen artificial organs grafted into place in his physiological apparatus as the genuine, original ones failed. Medical science, he conjectured, supplies the material groundwork, and out of the authority of his mind, Runciter supplies the remainder. I wonder how old he is, he wondered. Impossible any more to tell by looks, especially after 90. Miss Beeson, he instructed his secretary, have Mrs. Ella Runciter located and bring me the ident number. She's to be taken to office 2A. He seated himself across from her, busied himself with a pinch or two of Freiburg and Treyer Prince's snuff as Miss Beeson began the relatively simple job of tracking down Glenn Runciter's wife. Chapter 2. The best way to ask for beer is to sing out Ubik. Made from select hops, choice water, slow-aged for perfect flavour, Ubik is the nation's #1 choice in beer. Made only in Cleveland. Upright in her transparent casket, encased in an effluvium of icy mist, Ella Runceter lay with her eyes shut, her hands lifted permanently toward her impassive face. It had been 3 years since he had seen Ella, and of course she had not changed. She never would, now, at least not in the outward physical way. But with each resuscitation into active half-life, into a return of cerebral activity, however short, Ella died somewhat. The remaining time left to her pulse phased out and ebbed. Knowledge of this underwrote his failure to rev her up more often. He rationalized this way, that it doomed her, that to activate her constituted a sin against her. As to her own stated wishes, before her death and in early half-life encounters, this had become handily nebulous in his mind. Anyway, he would know better, being 4 times as old as she. What had she wished? To continue to function with him as co-owner of Runceter Associates. Something vague on that order. Well, he had granted this wish. Now, for example, and 6 or 7 times in the past. He did consult her at each crisis of the organization. He was doing so at this moment. "Damn this earphone arrangement," he grumbled as he fitted the plastic disc against the side of his head. "And this microphone, all impediments to natural communication." He felt impatient and uncomfortable as he shifted about on the inadequate chair which Vogelsang, or whatever his name was, had provided him. He watched her rev back into sentience and wished she would hurry. And then, in panic, he thought, maybe she isn't going to make it. Maybe she's worn out and they didn't tell me. Or they didn't know. Maybe she thought I ought to get that Vogelsang creature in here to explain. Maybe something terrible is wrong. Ella, pretty and light-skinned, her eyes in the days when they had been open had been bright and luminous blue. That would not again occur. He could talk to her and hear her answer. He could communicate with her, but he would never again see her with her eyes opened, nor would her mouth move. She would not smile at his arrival. When he departed, she would not cry. Is this worth it? He asked himself. Is this better than the old way, the direct road from full life to the grave? I still do have her with me in a sense, he decided. The alternative is nothing. In the earphone, words, slow and uncertain, formed. Circular thoughts of no importance, fragments of the mysterious dream which she now dwelt in. How did it feel, he wondered, to be in half-life? He could never fathom it, from what Ella told him. The basis of it, the experience of it, couldn't really be transmitted. Gravity, she had told him once, it begins not to affect you, and you float more and more. When half-life is over, she had said, I think you float out of the system, out into the stars. But she did not know either. She only wondered and conjectured. She did not, however, seem afraid, or unhappy. He felt glad of that. "Hi, Ella," he said clumsily into the microphone. "Oh," her answer came in his ear. She seemed startled, and yet, of course, her face remained stable. Nothing showed. He looked away. "Hello, Glenn," she said with a sort of childish wonder, surprise, taken aback to find him here. "What?" She hesitated. "How much time has passed?" "Couple years," he said. "Tell me what's going on." "Oh, Christ," he said. "Everything's going to pieces. The whole organization. That's why I'm here. You wanted to be brought into major policy planning decisions, and God knows we need that now. A new policy, or anyhow a revamping of our scout structure." "I was dreaming," Ella said. "I saw a smoky red light, a horrible light, and yet I kept moving toward it. I couldn't stop." "Yeah," Runceter said, nodding. "The Bardo Todol, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, tells about that. You remember reading that? The doctors made you read it when you were—" he hesitated. "Dying." He then said, dying, he then said. "The smoky red light is bad, isn't it?" Ella said. Yeah, you want to avoid it. He cleared his throat. Listen, Ella, we've got problems. You feel up to hearing about it? I mean, I don't want to overtax you or anything. Just say if you're too tired or if there's something else you want to hear about or discuss. It's so weird. I think I've been dreaming all this time, since you last talked to me. Is it really 2 years? Do you know, Glenn, what I think? I think that other people who are around me, we seem to be progressively growing together. A lot of my dreams aren't about me at all. Sometimes I'm a man, and sometimes a little boy. Sometimes I'm an old fat woman with varicose veins. And I'm in places I've never seen, doing things that make no sense. Well, like they say, you're heading for a new womb to be born out of, and that smoky red light, that's a bad womb. You don't want to go that way. That's a humiliating, low sort of womb. You're probably anticipating your next life or whatever it is. He felt foolish, talking like this. Normally he had no theological convictions, but the half-life experience was real, and it had made theologians out of all of them. Hey, he said, changing the subject. Let me tell you what's happened. What made me come here and bother you. S. Dol Melipony has dropped out of sight. A moment of silence, and then Ella laughed. Who or what is an S. Dol Melipony? There can't be any such thing. The laugh, the unique and familiar warmth of it made his spine tremble. He remembered that about her, even after so many years. He had not heard Ella's laugh in over a decade. Maybe you've forgotten, he said. Ella said, I wouldn't have forgotten. I wouldn't forget an S. Dol Melipony. Is it like a hobbit? It's Raymond Hollis's top telepath. We've had at least one inertial sticking close to him ever since G.G. Ashwood first scouted him a year and a half ago. We never lose Melipony. We can't afford to. Melipony can, when necessary, generate twice the psi field of any other Hollis employee, and Melipony is only one of a whole string of Hollis's people who've disappeared. Anyhow, disappeared as far as we're concerned. As far as all Prudence organisations in the society can make out. So I thought, hell, I'll go ask Ella what's up and what we should do, like you specified in your will. Remember? I remember, but she sounded remote. Step up your ads on TV. Warn people. Tell them. Her voice trailed off into silence then. This bores you, Runsiter said gloomily. No, She hesitated, and he felt her once more drift away. Are they all telepaths? She asked, after an interval. Telepaths and precogs mostly. They're nowhere on Earth, I know that. We've got a dozen inactive inertials with nothing to do because the psis they've been nullifying aren't around. And what worries me more, even more, a lot more, is that requests for anti-psis have dropped. Which you would expect, given the fact that so many psis are missing. But I know they're on one single project. I mean, I believe. Anyhow, I'm sure of it. Somebody's hired a bunch of them, but only Hollis knows who it is or where it is, or what it's all about. He lapsed into brooding silence then. How would Ella be able to help him figure it out, he asked himself. Stuck here in this casket, frozen out of the world, she knew only what he told her. Yet he had always relied on her sagacity, that particular female form of it, a wisdom not based on knowledge or experience, but on something innate. He had not, during the period she had lived, been able to fathom it. He certainly could not do so now that she lay in chilled immobility. Other women he had known since her death. There had been several, had a little of it, trace amounts perhaps. Intimations of a greater potentiality which, in them, never emerged as it had in Ella. Tell me, Ella said, what this Melipony person is like. A screwball? Working for money, or out of conviction? I always feel wary about that, when they have that psi mystique, that sense of purpose and cosmic identity, like that awful Serapis had. Remember him? Serapis isn't around anymore. Hollis allegedly bumped him off because he connived to set up his own outfit in competition with Hollis. One of his precogs tipped Hollis off, he added. Melipone is much tougher on us than Serapis was. When he's hot, it takes 3 inertials to balance his field, and there's no profit in that. We collect, or did collect, the same fee we get with 1 inertial, because the society has a rate schedule now which they're bound by. He liked the society less each year. It had become a chronic obsession with him. Its uselessness, its cost, its vain glory. As near as we can tell, Melipone is a money sigh. Does that make you feel better? Is that less bad? He waited, but heard no response from Ella. From her. Ella, he said. Silence. Nervously, he said, Hey, hello there, Ella. Can you hear me? Is something wrong? Oh God, he thought, she's gone. A pause, and then thoughts materialized in his right ear. My name is Jory. Not Ella's thoughts. A different Elan, more vital and yet clumsier, without her deft subtlety. Get off the line, Runciter said in a panic. I was talking to my wife, Ella. Where'd you come from? I am Jory, the thoughts came, and no one talks with me. I'd like to visit with you a while, mister, if that's okay with you. What's your name? Stammering, Runciter said, I want my wife, Mrs. Ella Runciter. I paid to talk to her, and that's who I want to talk to, not you. I know Mrs. Runciter. The thoughts clanged in his ear much stronger now. She talks to me, but it isn't the same as somebody like you talking to me, somebody in the world. Mrs. Runciter is here where we are. It doesn't count because she doesn't know any more than we do. What year is it, mister? Did they send that big ship to Proxima? I'm very interested in that. Maybe you can tell me. And if you want, I can tell Mrs. Runciter later on. Okay? Runciter popped the plug from his ear, hurriedly set down the earphone and the rest of the gadgetry. He left the stale, dust-saturated office and roamed about among the chilling caskets, row after row, all of them neatly arranged by number. Moratorium employees swam up before him, and then vanished as he churned on, searching for the owner. Is something the matter, Mr. Runciter? The von Vogelsang person said, observing him as he floundered about. Can I assist you? I've got some thing coming in over the wire, Runciter panted, halting. Instead of Ella. Damn you guys and your shoddy business practices. This shouldn't happen. And what does it mean? He followed after the moratorium owner, who had already started in the direction of Office 2A. If I ran my business this way... Did the individual identify himself? Yeah, he called himself Jory. Frowning with obvious worry, von Vogelsang said, That would be Jory Miller. I believe he's located next to your wife, in the bin. But I can see it's Ella. After prolonged proximity, von Vogelsang explained, there is occasionally a mutual osmosis, a suffusion between the mentalities of half-lifers. Jory Miller's cephalic activity is particularly good. Your wife's is not. That makes for an unfortunately one-way passage of protophasons. Can you correct it? Runciter asked hoarsely. He found himself still spent, still panting and shaking. Get that thing out of my wife's mind and get her back. That's your job. Von Vogelsang said in a stilted voice, If this condition persists, your money will be returned to you. Who cares about the money? Snert the money. They had reached Office 2A now. Runciter unsteadily reseated himself, his heart labouring so that he could hardly speak. If you don't get this Jory person off the line, he half gasped, half snarled, I'll sue you. I'll close down this place. Facing the casket, von Vogelsang pressed the audio outlet into his ear and spoke briskly into the microphone. Phase out, Jory. That's a good boy. Glancing at Runciter, he said, Jory passed at 15. That's why he has so much vitality. Actually, this has happened before. Jory has shown up several times where he shouldn't be. Once more into the microphone, he said, This is very unfair of you, Jory. Mr. Runciter has come a long way to talk to his wife. Don't dim her signal, Jory. That's not nice. A pause, and he listened to the earphone. I know her signal is weak. Again he listened, solemn and frog-like, and then removed the earphone and rose to his feet. What did he say? Runsiter demanded. Will he get out of there and let me talk to Ella? Von Vogelsang said, There's nothing Jory can do. Think of 2 AM radio transmitters, one close by but limited to only 500 watts of operating power, then another, far off but on the same or nearly the same frequency and utilizing 5,000 watts. When night comes, and night, Runsiter said, has come, at least for Ella, and maybe himself as well if Hollis's missing teeps, parakineticists, precogs, resurrectors and animators couldn't be found. He had not only lost Ella, he had lost her advice, Jory having supplanted her before she could give it. When we return her to the bin, Von Vogelsang was blabbing, we won't install her near Jory again. In fact, if you're agreeable as to paying the somewhat larger monthly fee, we can place her in a high-grade, isolated chamber, with walls coated and reinforced with Teflon 26 so as to inhibit any heteropsychic infusion from Jory or anybody else. Isn't it too late? Runsiter said, surfacing momentarily from the depression into which this happening had dropped him. You may return, once Jory phases out, plus anyone else who may have gotten into her because of her weakened state. She's accessible to almost anyone. Von Vogelsang chewed his lip, palpably pondering. You may not like being isolated, Mr. Runsiter. We keep the containers, the caskets as they're called by the lay public, close together for a reason. Wandering through one another's mind gives those in half-life the only... Put her in solitary right now, Runsiter broke in. Better she be isolated than not exist at all. She exists, Von Vogelsang corrected. She merely can't contact you. There's a difference. Runsiter said. A metaphysical difference which means nothing to me. I will put her in isolation, Von Vogelsang said, but I think you're right. It's too late. Jory has permeated her permanently, to some extent at least. I'm sorry. Runsiter said harshly. So am I. That's the end of the chapter. And so we have one more story to come, which I do have a link for. It is extant in various places on the internet. I'm just gonna... Yeah, I feel like that gives an adequate taste of the setting of the story, what's going on, what it's about. This one had a lot of nouns in it. Yeah, that's like the other thing that you start to get when you read more, I guess, modern, more recent fiction, frankly, but like sci-fi. Obviously there is less of it to choose from when you go back 70 plus years. It's another one you need to read. It goes to some interesting places, and I really enjoyed it. But yeah, it's a thing that, I can't help but notice when reading, especially like Philip K. Dick. But yeah, just like more modern fiction certainly from this era, is that there's a lot more nouns. There's a lot more like, this is a thing that doesn't exist in the real world, so in order to communicate that, I'm going to give it a name, and I'm going to try to come up with like a little bit of a not just a name, like a psychic or psionic or anything like that, or a telepath or someone with precognitive ability. I'm going to call them a psi, a teep, a precog, that sort of thing, because it's going through the assumption of people would use these words enough that they would truncate them down into more colloquial terms, and that's what I'm going to write with to give it more of a futuristic flavour, to make it feel more abstract and other. That's at least what I take from that. But yes, it does mean that you have at times to read some of these terms with a straight face, knowing that they sound kind of weird or kind of ridiculous. Personally, not a fan of it. Entirely fair. Yeah, that's yeah. I think I'm not a fan of it because it feels like it dates it. Like, kind of like, you know, bad CGI in an older film. It sort of, it feels like that. Like it's trying to look futuristic, and by trying and failing to look or sound futuristic, it makes it feel suddenly very dated and of its time. And yeah, sometimes you don't want to be reminded of that while you are reading. That's or watching. Like that's what it sort of hits the same as to me. Makes sense, but it makes it complicated. Okay, yeah. I mean, it's probably one that it reads better on the page, I think, than, because where there are terms like teeps or size and stuff like that, it's easier to read on the page and infer from the way that it's written what that word is, whereas there's a bunch of different ways to spell teep or sigh that don't immediately communicate what it's referring to. So yeah, I would think that, like, looking on the page, it's a little bit less jarring. Or yeah, reading old school sci-fi always makes you think of your dad. You get some good nostalgia from it, even when it's obviously outdated in style. Yeah, like I've said, for me, this was these were all well, no, apart from Annihilation, but like my interest in Philip K. Dick's writing, or Descending that I read last time, or The 9 Billion Names of God, which I'm about to read. These are all stories that I would have read in like books or short story collections that I pilfered from my older brother's shelves when he'd gone to uni. Before then I had read, like, I don't really know why I just suddenly went, ooh, I'm big into sci-fi, and I almost suspect it might actually have been from playing video games. If I ever write an autobiography, it will be titled Video Games Saved My Life, because that is true. I feel like possibly some of that might have come from with Frontier Elite 2. So you got Elite Dangerous now being made by wait, what? Yeah, is this studio called Frontier? I'm not sure. Yeah, I've just completely blanked on the name of the studio that makes Elite. But the space trading game, the first one was made in like 1982 or something, and I played a bit of that when I was a kid. And then Frontier Elite 2. I played a lot of that, and that had with it a little booklet of short fiction written within the universe of the game. And I think I might have thought at first that it was like an instruction manual, and so I was kind of reading it to try and just, you know, frankly figure out how to play the game, because it's complex as heck. And I just, yeah, it was like, I think at a point when I was like, yeah, trying to get into the game and trying to play it a lot, and reading this fiction, I was like, oh, I like this stuff. This is interesting. This is appealing to me and cool. I need more of this. I want more of this. And that's sort of possibly me. I had like some other books, one of which was a little bit sci-fi, but it was like a sort of Christian fiction sci-fi thing, I think, called like Dark as a Color, maybe. I could probably look that up, or someone in chat will look that up and link it in a sec. Yeah, I think that's sort of where, like, the broadly, like, the soil for my love of sci-fi, like, the seed started to grow up. And so, yeah, these, largely what I've been reading, are derived from that. And so, yeah, likewise, these come with heavy nostalgia. They do that. Oh, is that it? I did look it up a few years back. Yep, that's it. You've You have found it. I forget it's a series. There are more. Yep. That says 2004. It was, yeah, it will have been, well, this, good lord, that cover is awful. It was definitely written before 2004. I would think this edition was published in 2004. Oh boy. Yeah, okay, I'm not going to dig into that now, but I will look into that later and go on a trip. But for now, I have one more journey to take you on. This one, if you've seen Lucy's The Outer Wilds tribute video, don't go and watch it now, because spoilers. But that, yeah, so like there was the video she did, like the Outer Wilds music that I put a bunch of game footage to. Yeah, I connect this to that. I can talk about that at the end, but I'm going to start reading now. So your link is pinned at the top of chat, and this is originally published in 1990. Nice, yeah, that sounds more correct. That sounds right. Nice, but yeah. Anyway, I'm going to start reading. This is off a screen, so I struggle with that more than reading off a page. Excuse me, just adjusting the mic while I move it out of the way of the screen. When the very noisy motorbike has gone past, incredible, sir, you must be very popular at parties. I'm going to start reading. This is The 9 Billion Names of God by Arthur C. Clarke. This is a slightly unusual request, Dr. Wagner, with what he hoped was commendable, or said Dr. Wagner, screwed up, with what he hoped was commendable restraint. As far as I know, it's the first time anyone's been asked to supply a Tibetan monastery with an automatic sequence computer. I don't wish to be inquisitive, but I should hardly have thought that your establishment had much use for such a machine. Could you explain what you intend to do with it? Gladly, replied the Lama, readjusting his silk robes and carefully putting away the slide rule he had been using for currency conversions. Your Mark V computer can carry out any routine mathematical operation involving up to 10 digits. However, for our work we are interested in letters, not numbers. As we wish you to modify the output circuits, the machine will be printing words, not columns of figures. I don't quite understand. This is a project on which we have been working for the last 3 centuries, since the Lamasery was founded, in fact. It is somewhat alien to your way of thought, so I hope you will listen with an open mind while I explain. Naturally. It is really quite simple. We have been compiling a list which shall contain all the possible names of God. I beg your pardon? We have reason to believe, continued the Lama imperturbably, that all such names can be written with not more than 9 letters in an alphabet we have devised. And you have been doing this for 3 centuries? Yes. We expected it would take us about 15,000 years to complete the task. Oh. Dr. Wagner looked a little dazed. Now I see why you wanted to hire one of our machines. But exactly what is the purpose of this project? The Lama hesitated for a fraction of a second, and Wagner wondered if he had offended him. If so, there was no trace of annoyance in the reply. Call it ritual, if you like, but it's a fundamental part of our belief. All the many names of the Supreme Being, God, Jehovah, Allah, and so on, they are only man-made labels. There is a philosophical problem of some difficulty here, which I do not propose to discuss, but somewhere, among all the possible combinations of letters that can occur, are what one may call the real names of God. By systematic permutation of letters, we have been trying to list them all. I see. So you've been starting at A, and working up to Z, 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 Z. Exactly. Though we use a special alphabet of our own. Modifying the electromatic typewriters to deal with this is, of course, trivial. A rather more interesting problem is that of devising suitable circuits to eliminate ridiculous combinations. For example, no letter must occur more than 3 times in succession. 3? Surely you mean 2. 3 is correct. I am afraid it would take too long to explain why, even if you understood our language. I'm sure it would, Wagner said hastily. Go on. Luckily, it will be a simple matter to adapt your automatic sequence computer for this work, since, once it has been programmed properly, it will permute each letter in turn and print the result. What would have taken us 15,000 years, it will be able to do in 100 days. Dr. Wagner was scarcely conscious of the faint sounds from the Manhattan streets far below. He was in a different world, a world of natural, not man-made mountains. High up in their remote areas, these monks had been patiently at work, generation after generation, compiling their lists of meaningless words. Was there any limit to the follies of mankind? Still, he must give no hint of his inner thoughts. The customer was always right. There's no doubt, replied the doctor, that we can modify the Mark V to print lists of this nature. I'm much more worried about the problem of installation and maintenance. Getting out to Tibet in these days is not going to be easy. We can arrange that. The components are small enough to travel by air. That is one reason why we chose your machine. You can get them to India, we will provide transport from there. And you want to hire 2 of our engineers? Yes, for the 3 months that the project should occupy. I've no doubt that personnel can manage that. Dr. Wagner scribbled a note on his desk pad. There are just 2 other points. Before he could finish the sentence, the Lama had produced a small slip of paper. This is my certified credit balance at the Asiatic Bank. Thank you. It appears to be, adequate. The second matter is so trivial that I hesitate to mention it, but it's surprising how often the obvious gets overlooked. What sorts of electrical energy have you? A diesel generator providing 50 kilowatts at 110 volts. It was installed about 5 years ago and is quite reliable. It's made life at the Lamasery much more comfortable, but, of course, it was really installed to provide power for the motors driving the prayer wheels. Of course, echoed Dr. Wagner. I should have thought of that. The view from the parapet was vertiginous, but in time one gets used to anything. After 3 months, George Hanley was not impressed by the 2,000-foot swoop into the abyss, or the remote checkerboard of fields in the valley below. He was leaning against the wind-soothed stones and staring morosely at the distant mountains whose names he had never bothered to discover. This, thought George, was the craziest thing that had ever happened to him. Project Shangri-La, some wit back at the labs had christened it. For weeks now, the Mark V had been churning out acres of sheets covered with gibberish. Patiently, inexorably, the computer had been rearranging letters in all their possible combinations, exhausting each class before going on to the next. As the sheets had emerged from the electromatic typewriters, the monks had carefully cut them up and pasted them into enormous books. In another week, heaven be praised, they would have finished. Just what obscure calculations had convinced the monks that they needn't bother to go on to 10 words of 10, 20, or 100 letters? George didn't know. One of his recurring nightmares was that there would be some change of plan, and that the High Lama, who they'd naturally called Sam Jaffe, though he didn't look a bit like him, would suddenly announce that the project would be extended to approximately AD 2060. They were quite capable of it. George heard the heavy wooden door slam in the wind as Chuck came out onto the parapet beside him. As usual, Chuck was smoking one of the cigars that made him so popular with the monks, who, it seemed, were quite willing to embrace all the minor and most of the major pleasures of life. That was one thing in their favour. They might be crazy, but they weren't blue noses. Those frequent trips they took down to the village, for instance. "Listen, George," said Chuck urgently, "I've learned something that means trouble." "What's wrong? Isn't the machine behaving?" That was the worst contingency George could imagine. He might delay his return, and nothing could be more horrible. The way they felt now, even the sight of a TV commercial would seem like manna from heaven. At least it would be some link with home. No, it's nothing like that. Chuck settled himself on the parapet, which was unusual, because normally he was scared of the drop. I've just found what all this is about. What do you mean? I thought we knew. Sure. We know what the monks are trying to do, but we don't know why. It's the craziest thing. Tell me something new, growled George. But old Sam's just come clean with me. You know the way he drops in every afternoon to watch the sheets roll out? Well, this time he seemed rather excited, or at least as near as he'll ever get to it. When I told him that we were on the last cycle, he asked me, in that cute English accent of his, if I'd ever wondered what they were trying to do. I said, sure. And he told me. Go on, I'll buy it. Well, they believe that when they have listed all his names, and they reckon that there are about 9 billion of them, God's purpose will be achieved. The human race will have finished what it was created to do, and there won't be any point in carrying on. Indeed, the very idea is something like blasphemy. Then, what do they expect us to do? Commit suicide? There's no need for that. When the list's completed, God steps in and simply winds things up. Bingo! Oh, I get it. When we finish our job, it will be the end of the world. Chuck gave a nervous little laugh. That's just what I said to Sam. And do you know what happened? He looked at me in a very queer way, like I'd been stupid in class, and said, "It's nothing as trivial as that." George thought this over a moment. That's what I call taking the wide view, he said presently, but what do you suppose we should do about it? I don't see that it makes the slightest difference to us. After all, we already knew that they were crazy. Yes, but don't you see what may happen? When the list's complete and the last trump doesn't blow, or whatever it is they expect, we may get the blame. It's our machine they've been using. I don't like the situation one little bit. I see, said George slowly. You've got a point there. But this sort of thing's happened before, you know. When I was a kid, down in Louisiana, we had a crackpot preacher who once said the world was going to end next Sunday. Hundreds of people believed him, even sold their homes. Yet, when nothing happened, they didn't turn nasty as you'd expect. They just decided he'd made a mistake in his calculations and went right on believing. Guess some of them still do. Well, this isn't Louisiana, in case you hadn't noticed. There were just 2 of us and hundreds of these monks. I like them, and I'll be sorry for old Sam when his life work backfires on him. But all the same, I wish I was somewhere else. I've been wishing that for weeks, but there's nothing we can do until the contract's finished and the transport arrives to fly us out. Of course, said Chuck thoughtfully. We could always try a bit of sabotage. Like hell we could, that would make things worse. Not the way I meant. Look at it like this. The machine will finish its run 4 days from now, on the present 20 hours a day basis. The transport calls in a week. Okay, then all we need to do is to find something that needs replacing during one of the overhaul periods, something that will hold up the works for a couple of days. We'll fix it, of course, but not too quickly. If we time matters properly, we can be down at the airfield when the last name pops out of the register. They won't be able to catch us then. I don't like it, said George. It will be the first time I've ever walked out on a job. Besides, it would make them suspicious. No, I'll sit tight and take what comes. I still don't like it, he said, 7 days later, as the tough little mountain ponies carried them down the winding road. And don't you think I'm running away because I'm afraid. I'm just sorry for these poor old guys up here, and I don't want to be around when they find out what suckers they've been. I wonder how Sam will take it. It's funny, replied Chuck, but when I said goodbye I got the idea he knew we were walking out on him, that he didn't care because he knew the machine was running smoothly and that the job would soon be finished. After that, well, of course for him there just isn't any after that. George turned his saddle and stared back up the mountain road. This was the last place from which one could get a clear view of the lamasery. The squat, angular buildings were silhouetted against the afterglow of the sunset. Here and there, lights gleamed like portholes in the side of an ocean liner. Electric lights, of course, sharing the same circuit as the Mark V. How much longer would they share it? Wondered George. Would the monks smash up the computer in their rage and disappointment? Or would they just sit down, quietly, and begin their calculations all over again? He knew exactly what was happening up on the mountain at this very moment. The High Lama and his assistants would be sitting in their silk robes, inspecting the sheets as the junior monks carried them away from the typewriters and pasted them into the great volumes. No one would be saying anything. The only sound would be the incessant patter, the never-ending rainstorm of the keys hitting the paper. The Mark V itself was utterly silent as it flashed through its thousands of calculations a second. 3 months of this, thought George, was enough to start anyone climbing up the wall. "There she is," called Chuck, pointing down into the valley. "Ain't she beautiful?" She certainly was, thought George. The battered old DC-3 lay at the end of the runway like a tiny silver cross. In 2 hours, she would be bearing them away to freedom and sanity. It was a thought worth savouring like a fine liqueur. George let it roll round his mind as the pony trudged patiently down the slope. The swift night of the Himalayas was now almost upon them. Fortunately, the road was very good, as roads went in that region, and they were both carrying torches. There was not the slightest danger, only a certain discomfort from the bitter cold. The sky overhead was perfectly clear, and ablaze with the familiar, friendly stars. At least there would be no risk, thought George, of the pilot being unable to take off because of weather conditions. That had been his only remaining worry. He began to sing, but gave it up after a while. The vast arena of mountains, gleaming like whitely hooded ghosts on every side, did not encourage such ebullience. Presently, George glanced at his watch. "Should be there in an hour," he called back over his shoulder to Chuck. Then he added, in an afterthought, "Wonder if the computer's finished its run. It was due about now." Chuck didn't reply, so George swung round in his saddle. He could just see Chuck's face, a white oval turned toward the sky. "Look," whispered Chuck, and George lifted his eyes to heaven. There is always a last time for everything. Overhead, without any fuss, the stars were going out. The end. Thank you for listening. Dun dun dun. Yeah, I don't know. I like that one. It might be nostalgia. It might just be because I read it when I was, young. Obviously, the sci-fi of, wow, you have a computer that can do thousands of calculations a second and can take our task of printing a bunch of names out from 15,000 years or whatever to 3 months. Like, I too have an iPhone. I don't actually, mine's Google. That's one you've always particularly liked. Yeah, I would be interested to try and figure out how much of that is like nostalgia, how much of that is based on my own background that I've recently begun to like investigate and explore and look through. Deep thought vibes, yeah. But I don't know. I like that one. I think it's as much just the like. It's the sort of the calm inevitability of the end. Just the matter of fact, like overhead, without any fuss, the stars were going out. Like it's simple and nice, and it's like that's why I chose to use that as a quote to start the Outer Wilds video, because it's just simple. It's just matter of facts. It's just what's happening. There's a I don't know. There's a coldness to it, but not cold isn't right. Yeah, it's just a simplicity to it. And yeah, it's a simple story. It just there's no you have the setup, you have the the millennial urge for oblivion. Yeah, I don't. Well, like it doesn't. It's not comforting. I'm not like, you know. Ooh, yeah. Let's wander off into the sun. I'd like things to keep on going. Frankly, it's a good line indeed. Very appropriate for Outer Wilds. Yeah. It just I think I've since trying. Because I feel like when editing that video, I was like, oh yeah, there was that story that I read years ago, and that must have a line about the stars going out, because I remember that's how it ended and that I really liked it, and I think that's what put me on the path to looking it up and reading it here today, because it's one that I would have read in a short story collection 20 plus years ago, probably closer to 25 years ago actually for that one, and it stayed with me ever since, and that's what I've been enjoying sharing with you. But it is now 7:30 in my afternoon, and I'm going to take off. So, yeah, do please... Well, firstly, thank you for being here. It's much appreciated. Glad to see people coming for the earlier start time. I hope this has actually been a decent and convenient time for people. Sorry for anyone who's had to get up unusually early or, do whatever. Take off for the stars, maybe. Yeah, thank you for being here. And do come back tomorrow when Lucy will be reading you some Barchester Towers. The part 15 of that, I think. And 15 or 16? I think 15. Hang on, do I have... If I... don't have it set up on the... But hang on, no I do. Wait, there. Barchester Towers part 15 tomorrow, yes, at 9 PM BST, so the usual stream time. Do I have a sign-off line? Hell no. If you type all the names of me, does the stream end?